I did not walk into that house because I was brave. I walked in because my father had already signed, and the paper carried my name in the place where the money should have been. 3 days before a harbor board hearing that would decide who owned the deep water at Calder Point, Osip Kovac traded his eldest daughter against a debt he swore until the very end was not his. When the door of the Malik house closed behind me, I smelled rain on cold stone and gun oil underneath it, and I understood with perfect clarity that nobody was coming. What I did not understand, not for a long time, was that I had never been sold at all. The dress was the wrong color and my mother knew it. She circled me in the front room of the house on Sable Row, tugging at the seam beneath my left arm, breathing through her nose the way she did when she was disappointed in something she could not name out loud. The fabric was a heavy oyster gray, high at the throat, cut narrow through the ribs. It made me look like a woman being presented at a funeral, which I suppose was accurate enough. "Stand straight, Rena," she said. "You are slouching." I am standing exactly as straight as I was a minute ago. Then a minute ago, you were slouching. I did not answer. I looked past her shoulder at the tall windows and the gray harbor beyond them, at the cranes standing idle against a sky the color of wet ash. Vesna in winter had one mood and it committed to it fully. Somewhere down there, past the fish market and the customs sheds, the deep water berths were sitting empty because our family no longer had the money to keep a single hull tied to them. My mother, Vesna Kovac, had not looked at those berths in 11 years. She looked at the front room instead, at the candles and the good chairs and a silver tray inherited from a grandmother nobody had liked. She managed surfaces. She had managed them beautifully through 2 bankruptcies, 3 funerals, and the slow public rotting of her husband's name, and she had never once asked me a question she did not already know the answer to. The tailor knelt at my hem, pins between his lips, working fast. He had been paid in advance, which told me everything. Nothing in that house had been paid in advance since I was 19. "Not the shoes," my mother said. "The other shoes, the dark ones, they pinch. You will be sitting in a car, Rena, and then you will be walking across a courtyard. You will survive." She said it lightly. She could put a whole future into a sentence about footwear and never raise her voice once. I want to be fair to her, even now. She was not cruel. Cruelty would have required her to look directly at what was happening in her own front room, and my mother had built an entire life out of not doing that. My father came in at 9:10 with his coat still on and his gloves in his fist. Osip Kovac had been a large man once. He had shrunk the way men in our business shrink, from the inside, so that his suits still fitted his shoulders and hung wrong everywhere else. He filled a glass at the sideboard without offering one to anyone and drank half of it standing up. "The Malik car comes at 11, he said, "to the room generally. Not to me." "That is very early," my mother said. "It is when it comes." I watched him in the mirror over the sideboard. He would not meet my eyes in the glass, which was interesting, because for most of my life he had used mirrors specifically to look at people without having to face them. He had taught me to read a birth manifest at that sideboard. He had taught me to spot a padded tonnage figure, a forged custom stamp, the particular silence a man uses when he is stealing from you slowly. He had taught me the entire trade and then quietly stopped mentioning that I knew it. That is the part people never believe when I tell this story. They think I was a decorative daughter, ornamental and sheltered, educated in flower arranging. I had run the Kovac books for 6 years, every tariff schedule, every bribe to the harbor inspectorate, every side arrangement with the fuel brokers at Calder Point. When the money went, I was the one who watched it go, line by line, in my own handwriting. My father signed things. I understood them. Nobody in that room said the word sold. It was not that kind of house. What was said? Over 4 weeks? In fragments. at dinners where the food kept getting simpler, was that Drayton Malik held 11 million against the Kovac name, that he had bought the paper from 3 separate creditors at a discount, and that he had made an offer which my father described as generous. The offer was a marriage. The word my father used was consolidation. The word my mother used was opportunity. Neither of them ever used a verb that required a subject. It was rational. That is what I want understood. It was not a melodrama, and nobody wept. 2 families with a shared harbor and one of them insolvent. An arrangement with a document behind it and a lawyer named Tomasz Renko, who came to the house twice and ate all the good biscuits. My father would keep the Sable Row property and his position on the harbor board. My mother would keep the front room. My younger sister Liesel, who was 20 and beautiful and could not read a manifest to save her life, would keep her name unencumbered. And I would keep nothing, because I was the thing being exchanged, and you do not ask what the currency gets to keep. The tailor sat back on his heels and took the pins out of his mouth. "It is done," he said. "Do not lift your arms above your shoulders." I looked at myself in the tall mirror. Gray dress, dark hair pinned flat, a face that had gone very still somewhere around the 2nd week and had not moved since. I did not look frightened. I have thought about it a great deal since, and I am still not sure whether that was courage or simply the last useful thing my father ever taught me, which was that in a room full of people deciding your value, the only leverage left is refusing to show them the price. 11 o'clock, my father said again, to nobody, and went upstairs. Here is what was missing from that morning. Liesel. My sister did not come down. Her door stayed shut at the top of the stairs and stayed shut through the fitting and stayed shut while the tailor packed his case and let himself out. I know she was in there because I could hear her radio going, some cheerful nonsense from the mainland stations, turned up loud enough to fill a room and drown out a staircase. I knew almost nothing about the man I was going to. That is the strangest part to explain to people now. I knew what the harbor knew, which was reputation, which is to say, weather. Drayton Malik had come up out of the Calder district with nothing and had taken the fuel contracts off the Rasco family in a single winter without, so far as anyone could prove, killing anybody at all. He paid his crews on the 1st of the month in cash and in full, which in Vresna was closer to sorcery than generosity. He had no wife, no children, no photographs in the mainland papers. Twice a year he closed the whole port for a day, and nobody ever printed why. Men who dealt with him described him as reasonable. They said it the way you describe a dog that has not bitten you yet. I was not angry at my sister. I understood her perfectly. If you do not look at a thing, it is possible to believe you did not agree to it, and Liesel had been raised by our mother in the fine art of not looking. I stood at the bottom of the stairs with my hand on the newel post, and then I stopped standing there, because there is a limit to how long you can wait for a door that is not going to open. Nobody said goodbye to me in that house. Not one person. My mother kissed the air beside my cheek at 10:30 and then went to see about the candles. The other thing that was missing I did not notice until much later, and when I did notice, it changed the shape of everything behind it. They had let me pack one case, small, hard-sided, and the kind you take on a weekend. My mother had supervised, which meant she removed 2 books and a coat she considered provincial and added pearl earrings I had never worn. What she never did, and what I only understood much later, was ask about the box. Every woman in my family got a box. It was tradition, if you can call anything in our family tradition. A flat wooden case, no bigger than a hand, given by a grandparent, meant for letters and rings, and the small proofs that you had existed before the surname claimed you. My grandfather Miran had given me mine when I was 9 years old, on a fishing boat, on a morning cold enough that my fingers stuck to the metal rail. He had said one thing to me that day and made me repeat it back to him 4 times. That box had been in my room for 20 years. It was not in the house that morning. It had been gone for 11 days, and I had not told a living soul, because I had assumed, in the way you assume things when your entire life is being dismantled in an orderly fashion, that it was one more object my mother had reorganized. At 5 to 11, my father came back down. He was wearing his good coat, and he had shaved, which he had not done at 9. He crossed the front room and he stopped in front of me, and he did something he had not done since I was a child. He put both hands on my shoulders and he held me at arm's length, and he looked directly into my face for the first time in what must have been years. "You are a clever girl," he said. His voice had gone strange and thick. "You were always the clever one." And then he pulled me in against his coat and held on, hard, for 4 or 5 seconds, and I felt his hand press flat against my back between the shoulder blades, pressing, as though he were checking that I was solid. I thought it was love. I want to be honest about that, because it is the part I am least proud of. I stood in that hallway and let my father hold me, and I thought, he is sorry. He cannot say it. This is the only apology he has. A car horn sounded once in the street. He let go of me and stepped back, and his face had already closed again, smooth as a shutter coming down. "Go on," he said. "Do not make him wait." The car was not what I expected. I had built an entire vehicle in my head. Something long and black and German, with tinted glass and a driver who would not speak to me. What pulled up outside the house on Sable Row was a gray estate car with a dented rear panel and a child's booster seat visible in the back, which somebody had clearly removed in a hurry and then put back in wrong. A man got out of the driver's side. He was somewhere past 50, built like a wall that had settled, in a jacket that had been good about 9 years ago. He came around the front of the car and stopped at the gate and waited with his hands folded in front of him. And he did not come up the path. That detail mattered more than I understood at the time. Every man who had come to collect something from my father in the last 3 years had come up the path. "Miss Kovac," he said. "My name is Oral Prek. I work for Mr. Malik. Is that your case?" "It is." He did not reach for it. He looked at it, and then he looked at me, and something moved behind his face and was put away again. "I can carry that if you want. You do not have to let me." "I have it," I said. "Right," he said. Yes. My father did not come out. My mother watched from the front room window with one hand on the curtain, arranging even that, making sure the fall of the fabric was correct, while her daughter walked down the path with a weekend case. Upstairs, a radio was still playing. I stopped at the gate. "I want to be clear about something," I said to Oral Prek. "I am walking to this car. Nobody is putting me in it. If you tell that back to him exactly that way, in those words, I would consider it a kindness." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he opened the passenger door, the front one, not the back, and stood aside. "I will tell him," he said. "He will want to know." I got in the front. I put the case on my knees because there was a coat and a bag of rock salt in the footwell and nowhere else to put it. Oral Prek came around and got in and started the engine, and the car smelled of diesel and cheap pine air freshener and, faintly, of a dog. We pulled away from Sable Row. I did not look back at the house, and I have never once wished that I had. Here is what I had decided, somewhere around the 3rd week, lying awake and doing the arithmetic the way I do. I could not stop the transaction. My father had signed and Renko had filed, and the debt was real. 11 million against a name that could no longer borrow bus fare. But a transaction has 2 ends, and people who pay expect a return. And the only question that had ever mattered was what Drayton Malik thought he was buying. If he wanted a wife for the harbor board, I could be that. If he wanted humiliation, if he wanted to walk a Kovac through the fish market on his arm so that Vesna could see the old family kneeling, I could survive that too. Shame is loud and short. There was a third possibility I had turned over at 4 in the morning more times than I want to admit, and I had made a decision about that too, which was that whatever happened in that house, I would keep count. I would notice everything. I had run books for 6 years, and there is no situation so bad it cannot be recorded, and I had a half-formed and probably ridiculous superstition that a thing written down cannot swallow you whole. That was my entire plan. Walk in on my own feet and keep the ledger. We came down off the hill and turned east along the water, and the city began to change. Vesna is 2 towns pretending to be one. There is the old quarter with the customs house and the pale stone and the cafes where the shipping agents drink. And then there is Calder, and between them is a single iron bridge over a channel that stinks of diesel and rope. My mother had said the word Calder perhaps 6 times in my life, and every time she had said it the way you say the name of an illness. I had never crossed that bridge. 29 years old, born in this city, and I had never once had a reason. The buildings on the far side went low and close. Brick, cement, corrugated roofing, washing strung between windows in the January cold because people still have to wash. The streets narrowed and the tarmac gave up and became something older underneath. I sat with my case on my knees and waited to feel afraid. And I sat there waiting for quite a long time, and it did not come. And eventually, I worked out why. The streetlights were on. All of them. Every one of them. The whole length of the road, in a district where the city had switched off the lighting budget in the year I finished school. There was no glass in the gutters. The shop fronts had their shutters up. A woman was scrubbing the step of a bakery at 11 in the morning in weather that made your knuckles split, and she straightened up when the gray car went past and lifted a hand, and Oral Preck lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in reply. Somebody had swept the road. We slowed at a junction to let a van reverse, and I had time to look at the building on the corner. It had been a chandlery once, and the signage was still up, faded to a ghost. Now there was a queue outside it, 30 or 40 people in the cold, mostly women, some with children hanging off their coats, and the door was propped, and 2 men in aprons were carrying crates in from a truck. "What is that?" I said. "Thursday," Oral Preck said, as though that answered it, and then he seemed to reconsider and added, "Nobody signs anything. That is the whole arrangement. You come, you take what you need, and nobody writes your name in a book." I thought about the ledgers in my father's study. I thought about the harbor board and the way charity worked on my side of the bridge, where nothing was ever given that was not first recorded, weighed, and cashed in later at a moment of the giver's choosing. I am not being sentimental. I am telling you exactly what I saw and exactly how it landed, which was wrong. It landed wrong. I had been raised to understand that a man like Dritten Malik is a wound in a city, that money like his comes out of a place and leaves a hole where it came from, and I had spent a month constructing that hole in my imagination. I had furnished it, and here was Calder, poor, hard, unmistakably rough, and functioning. "You have not been over here before," Oral Preck said. It was not a question. "No. People think it is worse than it is," he said. Then, after a moment, he said, "People think a lot of things. Do you want to tell me which of them are true?" He almost smiled. He had a face that did not seem to have much practice at it. "You will do better if I do not," he said. "Ask him yourself." He answers questions. That is the thing about him nobody believes until they try it. Then he was quiet for the length of a street, and when he spoke again his voice had changed and I sat up slightly. "There is something you should have," he said. "Not from him. From me. There are people in this city who have been waiting 11 years for that man to make one mistake, and this week He has made a very public arrangement with a family that owes money to half the coast. You are going to be the mistake. That is how it will be read. Not by everybody. By enough. I looked out at the low brick and the washing and the lit lamps. You are telling me I am in danger. I am telling you that you are visible, Oral Preck said. In my experience, those are the same sentence with better manners. And the strange thing, the thing I could not get past, was that I had crossed this bridge for the first time at 29 years of age, and in the 10 minutes since, I had learned more about how my own city was actually held together than in 6 years of running its accounts. I had audited this district. I had never seen it. I had known the tonnage that moved through Calder Point down to the crate, and I had not known that the lights worked. My father had taught me to read the numbers. Nobody had ever suggested I go and look at what they were numbers of. We turned up a long incline away from the water, and the houses fell away, and there was a wall. Not a gate with lions on it. A wall. Old. 3 times the height of the car. Gray stone gone black with weather, running along the road for the length of 2 streets with glass set into the top of it. There was one door in the whole thing. Iron. And it was standing open, and there was nobody guarding it. I looked at that open door, and I felt the first thing that morning that was genuinely close to fear. You do not leave a door like that open unless there is no version of events in which anyone walks through it uninvited. The house behind the wall was not what my imagination had built either. It was old and square and gray, 4 floors, a working house rather than a beautiful one, the kind a shipping family builds when it has money and no interest in anybody knowing. The courtyard was swept. There was a lemon tree in a pot by the steps that had absolutely no business surviving a Vresna winter and was surviving it anyway, wrapped to the trunk in sacking, and somebody had done the wrapping carefully. Oral Preck carried nothing for me. He opened the front door and stood back and let me go in first, which I noticed. The hall smelled of cold stone and beeswax and rain, and under it, very faint, gun oil. I stopped 3 steps inside. I want to describe this properly because it is the thing I could not explain to myself for days afterwards. The hall was enormous and clean and completely, absolutely empty of any evidence that a person lived there. There were no photographs. Not one. Anywhere. On any wall or surface. In a house belonging to a man from a district where people put their dead on the mantelpiece. There were no coats on the hooks except 2. Both black, both his size. There was a long table down the side of the hall, and there was nothing on it at all. No bowl of keys, no letters, no gloves, no coins, none of the small silt that collects in a hallway where somebody lives. The rooms off the hall were the same. Furniture, good and plain and old. Books. But they were shipping registers and legal volumes and a run of harbor almanacs going back 40 years, all read to death. No pictures, no ornaments, no clutter. It was not sterile the way my mother's front room was sterile. Her rooms were arranged. This was a house a man had walked into and never once decorated, because decoration is what you do when you expect to be somewhere a long time, and some part of Drayton Malloch had evidently never made that assumption. Every window I passed looked at the harbor. "There is a woman who comes," Oral Preck said behind me. "Ilinka. She does the cooking. She has been here since before any of us, and she will tell you where things are. Your room is on the 2nd floor. "My room," I said. "Yes. Not his." Oral Preck stopped walking. He turned around at the bottom of the staircase and he looked at me with an expression I could not read at all. "Miss Kovach," he said carefully, "nobody in this house has said one word to me about what you are for. I have worked for that man for 11 years, and this is the first time I have not been told the reason for something. So I am going to take your case up to the 2nd floor, and then I am going to go and stand outside in the cold and think about that." He did take the case. I let him. The room was at the back, above the courtyard, with the lemon tree below and the whole gray harbor beyond it. It was warm. Someone had lit the fire an hour before I arrived, at least an hour, because the stone of the hearth was already hot. The bed was made. There were towels, a jug of water, a glass, and a bowl of the hard green olives that only come out of the Eastern markets, which I have eaten since I was a child, and which my mother refused to have in the house because she considered them peasant food. I stood in the middle of that warm room with my coat still on, and felt the ground move slightly, and told myself I was tired, and went to put my case on the chest under the window. There was a shelf beside the window with 4 books on it. 2 of them were mine. Not copies of mine. Mine. The Hanseatic port history with the water damage along the bottom edge from the summer the roof went, and the little cloth-bound thing on title survey that I had stolen out of my grandfather's cabin when I was 11 and never given back, with my own handwriting in pencil inside the cover, the letters formed the way a child forms them. My mother had taken those 2 books out of my case 11 days ago and told me they were provincial. I stood there with my hand on the shelf for a very long time. There are only so many ways a thing like that gets into a house. Somebody had gone into my bedroom on Sable Row, where I had slept every night of my life, and taken exactly the 2 books that mattered and nothing else, and brought them here, and put them on a shelf by a window facing the water, and lit a fire an hour early so the room would be warm when I walked into it. And whoever it was had known which 2. Downstairs, a door opened and closed, and I heard a man's voice for the first time, low and unhurried, asking Aurel Prec something in the hall. I could not hear the words. I did not move. I stood with my hand flat on the spine of a book my grandfather had owned, in a house I had been sold into, and understood that everything I had prepared myself for on the drive across that bridge was the wrong preparation entirely. Ilinka came for me at 1 o'clock. She was 70 if she was a day, small and square, with a dish towel over her shoulder and reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and she looked at me the way a customs officer looks at a manifest. "He is in the back room," she said. "He has been in the back room since 11. He has not eaten. If you can make him eat, I will consider that a debt. I am not sure what my standing is in this house. Neither is he," she said. "That is why he has not eaten." The back room faced west over the wall. There was a long table in it covered end to end in paper. Not files. Loose sheets, charts. Harbor surveys, some so old the folds had gone soft as cloth. Drayton Mallock stood up when I came in. The version of him I had carried across that bridge was so specific and so wrong that I need to correct it before I go any further. He was not tall. He was somewhere in his early 40s, dark, with a face that had been rearranged at some point around the nose and put back approximately right, and he was wearing a gray work shirt with the cuffs turned back twice. His forearms were a map of small white scars. He looked like a man who had spent 20 years lifting things. The only expensive object anywhere on him was the watch, and it was too old to be a purchase. It was somebody's. He did not come around the table. "Miss Kovach," he said, "will you sit down? I would rather stand until I know what I am standing in." "That is fair," he said, and sat down himself, which put him lower than me and did it deliberately, and I noticed, and he saw me notice. "Aurel told me what you said at the gate, that you walked to the car." He turned a sheet of paper over on the table, squared it with 2 fingers, and looked up. "I have been trying since 11 o'clock this morning to work out how to say the next part to you. I have not found a good way. So I am going to say it badly and quickly, because I think slowly and gently would be worse." The fire ticked in the grate. "Your father does not owe me 11 million, he said. "He has not owed me anything since the 14th of last month." The room did a slow quarter turn. "That is not possible," It is on the table behind you. I turned around. There was a leather folder on the sideboard, and my hands were not quite steady when I opened it, and inside were the discharge documents. 3 creditor notes bought up and consolidated and then cancelled, stamped, notarized, dated the 14th. Signed by Tamaz Renko as agent for the Kovac estate, and by Drayton Malik for himself. 3 weeks before the gray car came to Sable Row. I read it twice. Then I read the schedule of settlement, which showed the 11 million discharged against a warehouse block at Calder Point and 2 idle cranes, valued generously, valued in fact absurdly, in a way that would have made me laugh out loud in any other week of my life. He had overpaid for scrap by about 4 million so that the debt would zero out clean. He had let my father win. "Who negotiated this?" I said. My voice came out wrong. "Renko brought it to me in October. Your father's instruction. I took it because I wanted that warehouse and because the number stopped being interesting to me some years ago." "Then why am I here?" Drayton Malik put both hands flat on the table. "Because 11 days ago, Renko came back and told me your father wished to add a term. A personal term." He used the word consolidation. He said the family would be more comfortable if the arrangement were sealed the old way, and he brought a draft with your name on it, and he told me it was your father's dearest wish, and that you had been consulted and were content. He stopped. "I signed it," he said. "That is the part I am not going to soften. I read it, and I signed it, and I sent the car." "Why?" He looked at me for a long moment, and something went across his face that I did not have a name for until much later. And then he said, "Because I have been waiting 11 years for somebody in your family to give me a reason to be in a room with you. And when one finally arrived, I did not examine it as carefully as I should have." I sat down. Not because I wanted to. My legs made the decision. "You bought me," I said. "No. You signed a paper with my name in it." "I signed a paper with your name in it," he agreed. And then he said something I have thought about every day since. He said, "And then I spent 11 days finding out whether it was true that you had been consulted. And it was not true. And by then the car had already been arranged. And I had a choice between 2 bad things. I could send Aurel to that house with a letter canceling everything, in front of your mother and your father and the whole of Sable Row, and leave you standing in it. Or I could send the car and let you arrive somewhere warm and tell you the truth, with the door open behind you. The door is open. The door has never been shut. There is nobody on it. There is nobody on the wall. Aurel is outside in the cold because I told him to stand where you could see him and nowhere else." I looked at him across a table covered in charts, and I said the only thing left. "Then what am I, if I am not paid for?" "You are a woman whose father sent her out of his house under false pretenses," Drayton Malik said, "and I would very much like to know why, because I have been in this business a long time, and men do not do that for nothing." I did not answer him for a while. What happened in me in that silence was not relief. Relief would have been simpler. What I felt was a kind of vertigo, the specific sickness of a person who has spent a month bracing correctly against a wall that turns out not to be there. I had prepared for humiliation. I had prepared for a man who wanted a Kovac on his arm. I had built a whole architecture out of being wanted for something, and every beam of it had just been kicked away, and underneath there was only the question he had asked, which was the worst question I have ever been asked, which was why. If nobody wanted a wife, then nobody wanted a wife. And underneath it was something smaller that arrived a minute later and was somehow worse. My father had been describing the marriage offer at our dinner table for a month. Drayton Malik had first heard the word 11 days ago. For a fortnight before he ever put it to anybody, my father had sat at his own table selling us a proposal that did not exist yet, watching my mother arrange herself around it, waiting to see whether the household would swallow it. He had rehearsed us, which meant my father had not sold me. My father had sent me. There is a difference, and it is not a small one. And I sat in a warm room in Calder with the harbor going gray outside the window, and I began, very slowly and very unwillingly, to do the arithmetic. "May I ask you something?" I said. "Anything. 2 of my books are upstairs on a shelf. My mother took them out of my case 11 days ago and told me they were provincial." He nodded once, and he had the grace not to look away. "I did not steal them," he said. "I sent a man to your house with money for the girl who does the rooms, and I told him to ask her whether there was anything in that bedroom that looked as though it belonged to a person rather than to a family. She brought out those 2 books and a hairbrush. I sent the hairbrush back. Taking that felt wrong in a way I could not have defended, but the books did not. The books were your grandfather's," he said, and there it was. I had been in that house for 2 hours, and it was the first time either of us had said the word. "You knew Muren?" Drayton Mallock stood up. He went to the window and stood with his back to me, and I watched a man who had not flinched once in the entire conversation take 4 or 5 seconds to arrange his face before he turned around. "I was 14, he said. "I was working the Calder chain gang unloading fertilizer for a man who paid in food. Your grandfather came down the quay in October of that year, looking for somebody small enough to get into the bilge of a boat. And he picked me, and at the end of the day, he paid me in actual money. And when I tried to give half of it back because I thought it was a mistake, he sat down on a bollard and explained the mistake to me for an hour. He worked me for 6 years. He taught me to read a manifest. He taught me title survey out of that cloth-bound book upstairs, the one with your handwriting in the front. I used it every day for 4 years, and then you took it out of his cabin when you were 11 and never gave it back. And he let you. And he thought it was the funniest thing that happened to him that year." I put my hand over my mouth. I did not decide to. "He is the reason there is a wall around this house," Drayton said. "He is the reason I pay on the 1st of the month. Everything anybody in this city thinks I invented, I copied off a man who died in a room over a bait shop because his son would not pay for a hospital. That is not true. My father paid for the hospital. Rena," he said, and it was the first time he used my name. "I know what I saw on those accounts," I said. "I ran those accounts. You ran the accounts your father let you see. And that, somehow, out of everything in that whole appalling day, was the sentence that broke something open. Not the discharge documents, not the car, not the dress, not the paper with my name where the money should have been. It was a man in a work shirt telling me, kindly, that the ledgers I had trusted for 6 years had been curated for me the way my mother curated a mantelpiece. I sat very still, and I let it come. 11 days, I said. What? The books were taken 11 days ago. Renko brought the personal term 11 days ago. And 11 days ago, something went missing out of my bedroom that I have not told anybody about." Drayton Mallock came back to the table and sat down and put his hands flat on it again, and every trace of the careful gentleness he had been using on me since 1 o'clock went out of him, and what was underneath it was extremely quiet and not gentle at all. "Tell me what went missing." "My grandfather gave me a box when I was 9 years old," I said. "Flat, wooden, about the size of my hand. It has been on the shelf in my bedroom for 20 years, and it has never had anything in it except a dried flower and a ferry ticket, and 2 of my milk teeth, because it is a child's box, because I was a child. And I came home 11 days ago, and it was gone, and I assumed my mother had tidied it, and I did not say a word because I was busy being sold." He was already shaking his head slowly. "Nobody searches a house for milk teeth," he said. "No. They search for what they hope is in the box, and when they do not find it, they do not stop." "They send the box to somebody else," I said, and my own voice sounded very far away. "They send it to whoever is holding the rest of the debt, so that somebody with more leverage than they have can put the question to me instead." They send the daughter after it. He said nothing. He let me get all the way there on my own, which I have come to understand is the most consistent thing about him. He thought you would make me tell you, I said. Yes, because he could not. Because he could not, Drayton agreed. And then, very carefully, he said, Rena, tell me what your grandfather said to you on that boat. The fire ticked. Out over the harbor the light was already going, the flat early dark that comes down on Vresna in January at 3:30. He made me repeat it 4 times, I said. I was 9. I did not understand one word of it. He said, the water gives it back twice a day, and you will know the stone, because it is the only one my father cut. And then he said the rest of it. And the rest of it is not a location. What is it? He said, when they come to you for this, and they will come, then you decide. Not your father, not your mother, not any man who is kind to you for a fortnight. You. I looked up. I have carried that around for 20 years, I said, and I thought it was a nice thing an old man said to a little girl on a boat. And it was not. It was a warning. He knew. He knew 20 years ago exactly what my father would eventually do, and the only thing he could think of to give me was permission. Drayton Malik closed his eyes for a second. He knew, he said. He wrote to me about it. Once. I have the letter. The last of the light went off the water and the room went to shadow, and neither of us moved to put a lamp on. And downstairs I heard the front door open and Ilinka's voice go sharp in the hall. Tomasz Renko had arrived, and he had not come alone. Ilinka did not let them past the door. I heard the whole thing from the top of the back stairs, which is where Drayton put me with one hand flat between my shoulder blades and a single instruction, which was, stay where you can hear, because you will want to have heard this yourself, and not have me tell you about it. Renko had brought 2 men. He did not introduce them. He announced instead, in the pleasant carrying voice of a man who has eaten all the good biscuits in half the houses of this city, that he was here to collect the signed personal term at the family's convenience, and that Osip Kovac sent his warmest regards, and that there was a small additional matter concerning an item of sentimental property, which the family hoped Miss Kovac might be persuaded to speak about now that she was settled. Now that she was settled. 11 days after the box went missing, 4 hours after I walked through the door. Drayton let him finish. He let him get all the way to the end. Then he said, come in, Tomasz, and stand by the fire. You look cold. And Renko came in, and I heard the 2 men stay in the hall. I have the term here, Renko said. Yes. Bring it. Paper. The small dry sound of it changing hands, and I heard the fire door open, and I heard it go in, and I heard Renko make a noise that was not a word. That was the personal term, Drayton said, quite pleasantly. Now the other one, the discharge is already filed with the harbor registry, so there is nothing for you to do about that, but I want you to carry a message, because you are a message carrier, Tomasz. It is what you are for. You cannot burn a lodged instrument. I burned my copy. It was mine. I paid 4 million over the value of 2 dead cranes for the privilege of owning it, and I have just set fire to it in front of you. And I want you to describe that to Osip in as much detail as you can manage. There was a silence in that hallway that I could feel through the floor. Tell him the dead is dead, Drayton said. Tell him there is no arrangement, no term, no marriage, and no leverage of any kind between his house and mine. Tell him his daughter is upstairs and she is free to walk out of that door tonight with everything she came with, and that if she does, I will drive her myself to any address she names on this coast. And then tell him the last part, and get it right. Tell him that if he sends you here again, or if he sends anybody, or if I find one of his men within sight of this wall, I will not come to Sable Row. I will go to the harbor board. Renko said something too low for me to catch. Because I know what he is looking for, Drayton said. And because he has just told me, by sending you here in the same week, exactly how frightened he is that somebody else will find it first. The door. Feet on the courtyard stone. The gate. I came down the stairs and Drayden Malik was standing at the fire with his hands hanging at his sides, watching a corner of paper curl, and he did not turn around when I came in. You just gave away 11 million, I said. I gave away a piece of paper that let me own your family, he said. I have wanted rid of it since the moment I understood what he was using it for. He turned around then. Do you know what the worst thing about this week has been? It is that for 11 days I have been a man who is holding a note over the head of Miran Kovach's granddaughter. He would have walked in here and taken my face off with the flat of his hand. I stood in the doorway of a room that smelled of burnt paper and I did the only arithmetic left. He is not going to stop, I said. No. He has spent 11 days looking for a box that never had anything in it, and now the only place left to look is inside my head, and you have just taken away every civilized route he had to it. Yes. Then you have made it much more likely that somebody puts hands on me. Drayden Malik looked at me across that room for a long moment, and he did not lie to me, and I have never stopped being grateful for it. Yes, he said. I have. That is the price of the other thing, and you did not get to choose it, and I am sorry. I want to tell you that I slept that night. The attempt did not come at the house. Nobody was ever going to try the house. It came the next afternoon, in daylight, in the fish market on the old quarter side of the bridge, where I had gone because Ilinka needed brine olives, and because I had told Oral Prek in a very level voice that I was not going to spend the rest of my life on the second floor of a building looking at the water, and because a part of me that I am not proud of wanted to be seen. I wanted somebody from my mother's church to see me buying olives in Calder colors. That was the whole of my reasoning. That is what it cost. Oral was 11 steps behind me. I counted them afterwards. There were 2 of them, and they were not good at it. Real violence, in my limited and entirely involuntary experience, is not choreography. It is fast and stupid, and mostly consists of being surprised. One of them took my left arm above the elbow and turned me toward the alley beside the ice house, and the other one came in on my right side with his coat open and his hand inside it. And what he said, close to my ear in a perfectly ordinary voice, was, "Your father wants a word about your grandfather, and I know what he told you. And you are going to say it out loud right now." And I understood, with total clarity, in the middle of a fish market on a Tuesday, that my father had not sent one man to persuade me. He had sent 2 men to a public place at a time of day when there would be witnesses, because he did not need me to survive the conversation. He needed the sentence. I did not scream. I have gone over this 100 times and I still do not know why. What I did was drop the entire basket and set my heels and say, very loudly and very clearly, the wrong sentence. I said, "The tide is at the Rasco berth." Loudly, in a market where 40 people were listening and at least 6 of them worked for the Rascos. They both hesitated. Half a second. It was enough for Oral Prek to close 11 steps. The knife was never meant for me. I am fairly sure of that even now. It came out because everything had gone wrong at once, and because the man on my right had it in his hand already, and when Oral took hold of him from behind, he brought it round in a wild flat arc at nothing in particular, and I was in the nothing in particular. It went across the back of my left forearm. I did not feel it until about a minute later, and then I felt it a great deal. The rest took under 20 seconds. Oral Prek was not fast, but he was extraordinarily unbothered. And by the time 3 fishmongers waded in from the stalls, it was finished, and both men were face down on wet cobbles among the ice, and one of them was crying, and somebody had picked up my olives. I remember standing there holding my own arm and being embarrassed. That is the honest emotion. I was embarrassed about the basket. Drayton came through the market door of the ice house 40 minutes later. He had run at some point. I could see it in his breathing, and he was not a man who let you see anything. He did not touch me. He stopped a full arm's length away, and he looked at the towel around my forearm and the blood in it. And he said, in a voice with absolutely nothing in it at all, "Whose?" "Kovac," Oral said. "Both. The one on the left is Petar Vodnik. He has driven for her father since the summer." Drayton Malik nodded slowly. Then he crouched down in front of me where I was sitting on a crate, so that he was lower than me, and he put his hand out, palm up on his knee, and waited until I put my arm into it. "This is going to want stitching," he said. "Not a hospital. A hospital is a public record, and a public record is an address. I have a very high tolerance for this sort of thing. You have never had this sort of thing in your life." "I have had a badly set wrist since I was 19, I said, before I had decided to say it, and I watched him go absolutely still with my arm in his hands. He did not ask. He filed it. I saw him file it. It was Ilinka who did the stitching, on the kitchen table, under the good light, with a curved needle out of a tin that had clearly been in that house longer than I had been alive. She was fast and neat, and entirely without sympathy, which was the only thing I could have tolerated. Drayton sat on the other side of the table and gave me his hands to hold and did not say one word about being careful. 11, I said at the fourth stitch, mostly to have something to do with my mouth. 11 what? 11 million. 11 years. 11 days. 11 steps. 11 o'clock at Sable Row. It is a stupid number, and it will not leave me alone. Ilinka said, "Hold still and put the fifth one in." "It is not the number," Drayton said. "It is that you count." He turned my hand slightly under the lamp, looking at nothing, and said, "Your grandfather counted. He counted everything. He told me once that a man who does not know the number of something has already agreed to be lied to about it." I looked at him. "Say the whole letter," I said. "Not tonight. Say the part about me." Ilinka cut the thread and set the needle down in the tin and went out of the kitchen without being asked, which is how I learned that she had known him a long time. Drayton Malik sat across a kitchen table with my blood dried in the creases of his knuckles and said it from memory, and did not look at the wall while he said it. He wrote, "My son will spend it all before I am cold. I have put the grants where the water keeps them, and I have told nobody but the child, because she is the only one in my house who has ever counted a thing correctly in her life." He stopped. And then he wrote, "When it comes to her, do not go and get it for her. She will be surrounded by men who want to do that for her, and every one of them will be lying. Stand still and let her decide." The kitchen clock went on doing what kitchen clocks do. "That is why the door is open," I said. "That is why the door is open." I sat in that kitchen with 9 stitches in my arm, and my father's driver in a cellar somewhere down by the bunkering sheds, and I understood that I had walked out of a house where I was an asset into a house where I was, for the first time in 29 years, a person whose decision somebody was actually waiting on. It should have felt like safety. It did not. It felt like the whole weight of something being set down in my hands. The doctor came at 8 the next morning, and she came on a bicycle. Her name was Nevena Scar, and she had a practice 3 streets down from the old chandlery, and she came into that kitchen shaking rain off a waxed jacket, and told Drayton Malik to get out of her light in a tone that suggested she had been telling him that for a decade. She unwrapped the arm, looked at Ilinka's stitching, and grunted. 9, she said. Even. She could do this professionally. Then, to me, flex the fingers. Now against my hand. Good. He missed the tendon by about the width of a match. You are going to be extremely lucky about this for the rest of your life, and you will not feel lucky for at least a month, she wrote in a notebook. Then she took my right hand, the one with nothing wrong with it, turned it over and pressed her thumb into the base of the wrist, and I heard myself make a noise. She did not let go. "How long?" she said. "It is old. I can see that it is old." "I am asking how long." 10 years. Dr. Scar turned my wrist under the lamp with the unhurried attention of a woman reading a label. The two small bones here were broken and never set. They knitted however they liked. "You have full function and permanent inflammation, and you will have arthritis in that joint before you are 45. Whoever looked at it did nothing." "Nobody looked at it," I said. She stopped. I had never said that out loud before, to anybody, and I did not say it to be brave. I said it because it was 8 in the morning, and I was tired in a way I had not been tired before, and because the woman was holding my wrist and asking a direct question, and because I had run out of the energy required to maintain the story. "You had a broken wrist for 11 years and nobody looked at it." I said I fell down the back stairs and everybody agreed that I had. Navina Scar set my hand down on the table very gently. Then she looked over my head at the door of the kitchen where Duritan Malik was standing, because he had not gone out of her light at all, and something passed between them that I did not see because I was looking at the table. She packed her bag. At the door, she put her jacket on and said, without turning round, "Miss Kovach, I have been treating people on this side of the bridge for 19 years, and there is a thing I say to about 4 women a year, and I am going to say it to you. So listen, and then we will never mention it again." Nobody looked at it. That is a sentence about them. It has never once been a sentence about you. The bicycle went off up the hill in the rain. Drayton sat down across from me and put a cup of coffee in front of me, and did not say anything at all for a while, which I have come to understand is the most he can do when he is furious. "Do not," I said. "I have not said a word. You are going to do something about my father's wrist. I can hear you doing it." "Rena," he said. Then he stopped and started again, and what he said was, "I have a very old habit of settling accounts for people who have not asked me to. Your grandfather told me it was the worst thing about me. He said it made me feel enormous and it made everybody else feel like furniture. So I am sitting here doing nothing about it," he said, "and it is taking most of what I have." Ilinka came in with the kind of energy that means bad news arriving from outside, and behind her came Oral Prek with Rain on his shoulders and a folded paper in his hand. He put it on the table in front of me and not in front of Dritan, which I noticed, and which I think was deliberate. It was a public notice from the Harbor Board of Resna. Petition 11/4, filed by Osip Kovac as a board member and as executor of the estate of Miran Kovac, requesting that the 4 deep water berths at Calder Point be declared derelict of title and reassigned, the original grants of freehold being, quote, "lost or destroyed," unquote, and no claimant having produced them within the statutory period. Hearing at first light on Thursday, I read it 3 times. "Today is Wednesday," I said. "Yes. He is not looking for the grants anymore." Oral Prek said quietly, "No. He has stopped looking. He has decided it is cheaper to have them declared not to exist." I put the notice down on the table and I found that my hands were perfectly steady, which surprised me. And I looked at the 2 of them and I said, "Explain to me what this does to you." Drayton did not soften it. "Everything I have at Calder Point sits on those 4 berths," he said. "The fuel contracts, the bunkering, the crane leases, all of it runs off a license to operate on somebody else's freehold, and the freehold is your grandfather's, and has been unclaimed since he died. If the board declares it derelict on Thursday, they will reassign it inside a month, and it will go to whoever has been buying board members since October, which is your father, funded by whoever your father has been selling the reassignment to in advance, which will be the Rasco family, because they are the only people on this coast with that much cash and that much appetite. And then, And then I am a tenant of the Rascos on the ground I have worked for 11 years, or I am gone. And about 900 people who unload those berths are working for men who pay on the last Friday of the month, if they pay. Ilinka said something short in the old dialect and went back to the stove. So it is not 11 million, I said. It was never 11 million. 11 million was the fee your father paid me to hold still while he did this. Drayton Malik put both hands flat on the table in the way I had already learned, meant that he was about to be more honest than was good for him. Rena, I need to say the next thing very plainly, and then I need to stop talking. Say it. There is one object in the world that stops this. It is a set of papers your grandfather put somewhere 20 years ago, and you are the only living person who knows where. If they are produced at that hearing on Thursday, the petition dies in the first minute, and everything your father has spent since October is ash. He stopped. That is the entire situation, he said, and I am not going to ask you. You are not going to ask me. No. You have 900 people and 11 years and a wall around your house, and you are not going to ask me. Drayton Malik stood up, and he pushed the notice back across the table toward me with one finger, and he said, he wrote down that men would line up to go and get it for me, and every one of them would be lying. I am the last one in the queue, and I would be lying too, so no. I am going to go and see about the boats, and you are going to sit in this kitchen with that paper, and whatever is in your head at 4 o'clock this afternoon is what happens. He went out. I sat in Ilinka's kitchen from 9:15 until 3:30 with a public notice, a cup of coffee going cold, and 9 stitches. I would like to tell you it was an agony of moral reasoning. It was not. I knew inside 10 minutes. What took the other 6 hours was less flattering, which was that I had never once made a decision somebody else did not eventually take credit for, and I was frightened of getting it wrong in some way I could not name. At 2 o'clock I went upstairs and got the little cloth-bound book on title survey off the shelf by the window. I want you to understand what happened next, because it is the only part of this story that I am unambiguously proud of. I did not remember where the stone was. I never had. I was a child on a boat in October, and my grandfather did not hand me a location, because a location can be beaten out of a child. He handed me a method, and he trusted me to still be able to use it 20 years later. The water gives it back twice a day. You will know the stone because it is the only one my father cut. His father. Not him. My great-grandfather, Andrei Kovac, who was not a shipper at all, who was a stonecutter from up the coast, and who worked on exactly one piece of the Vresna harbor works in his life, and I knew which one because it is in every harbor almanac ever printed in this city, and there was a run of them 40 years deep in the back room downstairs. The eastern return of the old seawall at Calder Point, cut and set in the winter of 1931, 14 courses. Below the 4th course everything is submerged except at spring low. Spring low on Thursday morning was at 5:20. First light was at 7:10. I sat on the floor of that bedroom with a tide table and a survey book, and did the arithmetic 3 times. And then I went down and found him in the courtyard under the lemon tree, with the sacking in his hands, doing something slow with the wrapping because he needed his hands to be doing something. I have it, I said. He did not move. I want to say the terms first. Say them. I go, I said. Not you. Not Aurel. Not a man with a light. I go into the water and I put my own hands on it, because if anybody else brings it up out of that wall, then for the rest of my life, it will be a thing that was retrieved for me. And I have had enough of things being done on my behalf to last several lifetimes. All right. And when it is up, it does not come here. It does not go into your safe. And it does not go into my father's hands, and it does not go to the Rascos. It goes to the registry at first light with me carrying it. Drayton Malik stood in the dark with a piece of sacking in his hands and said, in a voice that was not quite level, "All right, You have not asked what I am going to file. No. Why not? Because he told me to stand still, he said, and I have been standing still since 1 o'clock on Monday afternoon, and it is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I am not going to ruin it with a day and a half left. I crossed the courtyard. I did not fall into his arms. Nobody in this story ever did anything as simple as that. I walked up to him in the cold and I put my right hand flat on his chest, over the shirt, the way you put a hand on a door to find out whether there is a fire on the other side of it, and I stood there with my palm on a man's heart for about 4 seconds. It was the first time I had touched anybody voluntarily in 10 years. You are shaking, he said. It is January. It is not January. No, I said. It is not. The tide went out from under the eastern return at 19 minutes past 5 on Thursday morning, and it took the temperature of the world down with it. There were 6 of us on that wall in the dark. Drayton, Oral, 2 of the men off the bunkering cruise, Ilinka, who had refused to be left, and me, in borrowed waders 3 sizes wrong with my stitched arm inside a fishing glove taped at the wrist, going down the courses of a 100-year-old seawall by feel with a hand lamp in my teeth. 14 courses. Below the 4th, weed and cold that stopped being cold and became a kind of loud noise. I found it at 26 minutes past 5. You could not have seen it. That is the thing. In daylight, dry, from a boat, it is one gray block among 4,000. But my great-grandfather, Andrei Kovac, cut his stone the old way, with a fine tooth, and every other stone in that wall was cut by a machine in a yard. And under a hand lamp, with your fingers on it, the difference is not subtle at all. It is like touching handwriting. The face of it came away in one piece with a bar. Behind it was a lead-lined cavity the size of a bread tin, dry as a drawer, and inside was an oilskin roll tied with tarred twine that had been put there by an old man on his own, at night, at spring low, 20 years ago, with nobody standing beside him, because he had nobody left he could trust with it. There were 2 things in that roll, and I did not find the second one until the car. The grants were the top layer, 4 of them, heavy paper, the seals still bright. Under them was one folded sheet, witnessed by a solicitor in the old quarter, and dated 11 days after my 9th birthday, in which Miran Kovac gave the freehold outright and absolutely to his granddaughter, Rena. From the age of 9, I had owned the ground my father spent his whole life failing to sell. He could never have taken it off me as executor, because it had never been in the estate at all. That is why it had to be declared lost, not stolen, not withheld, lost, so that a board could hand it to somebody else and nobody would ever have to say out loud that it had been mine. I got it into my coat, and I got back up the courses, and somebody had a hand out at the top, and I did not take it. That is when the lights came on. 3 sets of headlamps up on the Point Road, and men coming down the causeway, and my father's voice in the dark saying my name in a tone I had heard my entire life, the reasonable one, the one he used at the sideboard. Rena, come here, please. You are going to catch your death. He had 8 men. Oral counted them out loud, quite calmly, for everybody's information. Renko stood behind him holding an umbrella in a wind that made it pointless. Drayton Malik did not draw anything and did not step in front of me. He moved sideways, 1 pace, and stood where I could see him, and stopped. That was all. He stopped. Give it to me, my father said. He was already reaching. That belongs to the estate, and I am the executor of the estate, and this has gone far enough. You have been in that house 4 days. Do you have any idea what is being said about you? Say the date, I said. What? Say the date the debt was discharged. Rena. The 14th, I said. 3 weeks before the car came. Renko filed it and you countersigned it, and there was no debt in this world by the middle of last month. So when you stood in the front room and let my mother pin me into a gray dress and told me it was consolidation, you were not saving anybody from anything. There was nothing left to save us from. You had already been paid $4 million over the value of 2 dead cranes. My father's face did a thing in the lamplight. You do not understand the pressures. You took the box, I said. He stopped reaching. You went into my bedroom 11 days before you sent me away, and you took a wooden box off my shelf with 2 of my milk teeth in it. And you opened it somewhere, alone, and you found nothing, and you did not put it back. And then you added a personal term to a settled contract, and you sent me across that bridge to a man you thought would break me open for you. Renko, my father said, tell her. But Tomas Renko had taken 1 step backwards, and then another, because lawyers can read a room. And here is the part I did not plan, the part that came up out of somewhere much older than that morning. You had my wrist set by nobody, I said, when I was 19. You stood in the hall and you agreed that I had fallen down the back stairs, and then you went out to a meeting, and I have never said 1 word about it to a living soul until yesterday morning. And do you know why? Because I could not think of anything to compare it to. And now I can. I have spent 4 days in a house where a man would not so much as ask me a question that was rightfully mine to answer, and it turns out that is what it looks like when somebody thinks you are a person. So I have a comparison now, and I have run the numbers, and you come out very badly. The wind came across the point. Give me the papers, my father said, and something had gone out of his voice. No. Rena, if the Raskos do not get those births, they will come for this family. They will come for your mother. They will come for Liesel. They will come for you, I said. Say the true sentence. You have never once said a true sentence to me. Say it now, and I will consider it. My father stood on a causeway in the dark with 8 men behind him and did not say it. My father looked past me then, over my shoulder, up the causeway, and whatever was on his face reorganized itself. I turned round to see what he was seeing. They had come down off the Point Road without one of us hearing it, because men who unload berths for a living know how to walk on wet stone. The bunkering crews, both shifts. I stopped counting past 60, and there were more coming past the crane, and not one of them was carrying anything, and not one of them said a word, and that was very much worse for my father than if they had. Nobody touched anybody on that causeway. Nobody needed to. So I turned back around and I gave the roll to nobody. I want that on the record because everybody in Vresna tells this part wrong. They say I handed it to Dritan Malik on the seawall. I did not. I put it inside my coat and I walked past my father and I got into the front of a dented gray estate car with Oral Prek driving, and Dritan Malik sat in the back, like a man being given a lift. And at 7:10 on Thursday morning, I walked into the harbor registry office on the old quarter side of the bridge, with weed in my hair and salt drying on my face, and I filed the original grants of freehold for the 4 deep water berths at Calder Point. Not in his name, and not in mine either, which is the part that made the young solicitor put his head in his hands. I own them. I had owned them since I was 9. And I signed them straight out of my own hands into a standing trust with the district as beneficiary, drawn up between 5:30 and 7 that morning at the kitchen table, of a very frightened young solicitor who had never done anything like it and had been woken for the purpose, with 3 conditions written into the deed. The berths cannot be sold. The berths cannot be reassigned by any board, and the operating license renews annually by a vote of the crews who work them. Then I walked across the corridor into the hearing room at first light and put a certified copy on the table in front of the Harbor Board of Vresna, and Petition 11/4 died in under a minute, exactly as advertised. My father was not in the room. He was still out on the point. They put him on a boat that afternoon. I did not do it, and Dritten did not do it. The Rasko family did it, because Osip Kovac had sold them a reassignment that no longer existed and had spent their advance since October, and by lunchtime there was no version of Resna in which he could stay. He went out on the evening ferry with 2 cases. My mother did not go with him. She is still in the front room on Sable Row, arranging things, and she has never once asked me a question about that Thursday. Liesel came across the bridge in March. She stood in Ilinka's kitchen and cried and said she had turned the radio up because she could not bear it. And I said, I know, I heard it. And we have been slowly building something ever since out of a fairly small amount of material. I did not go back to the house on the 2nd floor and sleep for a week and wake up transformed. It took much longer than that, and it was much less dignified. But on the Thursday, at about 4 in the afternoon, I came down the stairs in dry clothes with my arm in a sling because Dr. Scar had shouted at me for going in the water, and I found Dritten Malik standing in the hall doing absolutely nothing at all. He had a piece of paper in his hand, and he was not reading it. What is that? It is a list of the crane leases that need renegotiating now that the ground under them belongs to a trust I do not control, he said. There are 41 of them. It is going to be an extremely tedious year. I put my hand out and he gave me the list, and I looked down it, and inside about 15 seconds I said, 9 of these are wrong. I know. The escalator clauses are indexed to tonnage and half the tonnage figures are padded, I said. Whoever audits these for you should be taken outside. I do not have anybody who audits these for me, Dritten said. I have a man who checks them. It is not the same thing, and I have known that for 6 years. And I felt it start to happen. I felt myself reach for it, the way you reach for a coat by the door. Give me the file. Give me the 4 years of tonnage returns and the fuel manifests, and I will have this rebuilt by the end of the month. And I will be useful, and being useful is the only currency I have ever been paid in. I stopped. I am about to make myself indispensable to you, I said. Yes, he said. I noticed. I do that. It is what I did in that house for 6 years. I made myself the only person who understood the books, and I told myself it was competence, and it was not. It was insurance. I was buying the right to stay in a family that had already decided what I was for. Dritten Malik took the list out of my hand and folded it in half and put it in his back pocket. Then do it in April, he said. I looked at him. The leases will still be wrong in April. The tonnage will still be padded. Nothing in that file is going anywhere. And if you rebuild it in 11 days, you will have proved something to somebody who does not require proof, and I would rather you did not. Then what am I doing until April? You are living in a house, he said. It is a thing people do. I am told it involves a great deal of sitting down. And then he said the thing. He said, you are not my wife, Rena, and you are not my employee, and you are certainly not my property, and I have been trying for 4 days to find the word, and there is not one, and I have decided that is because the word is supposed to arrive later and everybody who rushes it is lying. So for now you are the woman who filed those grants into a trust that neither of us controls. That is the whole of it. That is enough. Nobody had ever offered me a position with no duties attached before. I did not know what to do with my hands. So I did what I had done in the courtyard, which by then was the only vocabulary I had. I crossed the hall, and I put my palm flat on his chest, and this time he put his hand over the top of it and held it there, and neither of us said anything for a while, and out through the open front door, the light was going off the harbor the way it does in January at 3:30. I did not walk into that house because I was brave, and I did not stay because he saved me. He never saved me once. That is the entire point, and it took me most of a year to be able to say it out loud without feeling ungrateful. He stood still, in a city of men who would have gone down that seawall for me, who would have brought the papers up out of the water and put them in my hands and called it devotion. He stood on the causeway 1 pace to the side, where I could see him, and he let me be cold, and he let it be mine. My grandfather gave a 9-year-old girl on a fishing boat the only inheritance he had left, which was permission. It took me 20 years and 11 days to spend it. And when I finally did, I did not look back at the house on Sable Row, and I have never once wished that I had. So there it is. Rena Kovac was not sold to the mafia boss of Calder. She was sent, by her own father, as a key to a lock, and the man on the other side of that door turned out to be the one person in Vresna who refused to use her. If you loved this slow burn, if you love a heroine who walks in on her own 2 feet and files the paperwork herself, then hit that like button and subscribe, because we tell these stories every week. And tell me down in the comments, at what exact moment did you know her father had planned the whole thing? I will see you in the next one.